Chapter 12. God's Genius and Equal Opportunity Genius. When Nick re-entered the home with Sean and his gang, they looked around for Katie, with Kathy over-exuberant, excited to meet her favorite inspirational author and speaker. Jeannie made motion with her head toward the three-season porch, indicating Katie's lengthy conversation with what Katie considered her lifeline. She was still in the three-season porch, letting Scotty have it, while all that other stuff was happening between Nick and Annie and when the Everetts arrived. "Scotty, where have you been? Why haven't you answered your phone?" she asked while she moved on out toward the three-season porch. "Do you know that you had me scared half to death? You need to answer your phone." "Look who's talking, Little Miss Runaway," Scotty said with a somewhat groggy voice. "What's the matter with you? You sound sick?" "I'm fine, but I think that they gave me just a little too much anesthesia." "Anesthesia?" Katie asked frantically. "Why would you have anesthesia?" "Becca said it was just going to be a mild sedative." "Yes, and they found the source of the problem and went in and repaired the ulcer, so I had a bit more surgery than anticipated. I'll be laid up for a few days, can't move around much from the sutures, and I'm in a bit more pain than I anticipated. They've moved the colonoscopy off a day or two, and I'm staying here in the hospital for a couple of days, for observation, to see that the repair work sticks. You know me, and so does my doc. He's afraid I'll pop the stitches." "Are you sure that you're okay? That doesn't make any sense to me. Are you lying to me?" Scotty winced, knowing his lie was pretty far-fetched, but quickly decided it was best to change the subject. "I'm fine. Now, how's things there? I take it you are at Thomas's grandparents'. Can I assume that they are making you eat?" "I've had 3 meals today," she said, fibbing a little. "You would have been proud of Nick. I tried to get away with only half an omelet. He forced me down in a chair, cut up my omelet, and nearly force-fed me all of it. He even made me swallow it down with milk for extra calories. He's been watching me like a hawk at every bite." "Good, I've taught him well. I had some over-the-phone coaching sessions about how manipulative you are and gave away all your trade secrets. You won't get by with anything down there. Including the rental car, which I understand that you had taken away." Jay had the rental car returned, but told the agency to say that Trooper Scotty P. Wells demanded it be returned. Of course, Scotty, being in surgery, had no idea, but figured he'd play along. Jay was great at working behind the scenes, never letting Katie know what he was up to next. There was a pause in the line. "Scotty?" He grunted in pain while he adjusted his spot. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Now stop worrying." He did the best he could to sound normal. "Becca's here and so is Matthew, he wants to talk to you." Scotty handed him the phone. "Kate, I'm so surprised that you would pull a stunt like you did. I'm shocked that you would worry us all like that. Now, Nick has strict instructions to watch your every move, and if he can't, then you'll be hearing from me when you get home. I've had your rental vehicle taken away, and now you'll have to rely on Nick and the kindness of those people down there, all because we can't trust you. You scared Scotty, me, Jay, everyone. Do not pull something like that again, do you hear me?" "You had it taken away?" "I thought Scotty did it. Matthew, not being in on the plan, bluffed it." "No, it was me." "I'm sorry, Matthew. I've already heard it from Nick's mother, him, his grandmother, and grandfather. I won't do it again. I'm so sorry." "Wow, that was easy," Matthew said. "I guess that clean, crisp Tennessee air and being with Nick's family agrees with you." She turned and looked toward the living room, watching from a distance, Nick interacting with his family. "Matthew, you'd be surprised and delighted at how wise that tortoise-brained artist really is. He's made so much sense. As a matter of fact, Matthew, sometimes I think he's even wiser than you, in some aspects, if that's even possible, but he's not a prude or a master geek, so that's good." Katie chuckled. Matthew laughed and was delighted to hear of Katie's growing respect for Nick, again. Well, good, just don't drag him back down to your level, he's working hard to clean it up, he said. Ha ha, very funny, doormat, she said. Okay, well, that didn't last long, Kate. Becca's here and she wants to talk to you. Becca then got on the phone, she had pulled herself together. Katie, are you having fun? Oh, yeah, ball, being babysat like a baby. Well, maybe if you weren't acting like one. I know, Becca, didn't you just hear your husband bawl me out? I got the message. Listen, take good care of my Scotty. Give him a hug for me. I gotta get back into there, or they are going to think I'm rude. Give the phone to him, one more time. Okay, well, have fun and be nice to Nick. Katie shook her head and waited for Scotty to get on the line. What is it, my bratty bear? Shoo, don't talk, just listen. I love you, Scotty, and I'm sorry I made you worry. I won't ever do that again. I can't wait to come home and see you, and I'm going to take over Becca's job and help you heal. I won't give you a hard time anymore, either kind. She started laughing, not realizing how funny that sounded. He snorted a laugh. Okay, who is this, and where is my bratty bear? How did you get so good at imitating her voice? Now, I demand that you put my Katie bear back on the phone, or I'll send the entire FBI missing person squad down there. Ha ha, no, really, I mean it. No more of me being a brat, Scotty. I love you. Thanks, Katie, do me a favor, okay? Sure, what? Tell Thomas the First said thanks, and when I get down there, I want to see the brick wall he used on you. They both laughed. I love you, my Katie bear, he said as his voice started to break. Katie noted the crackling of his voice as if he were going to burst out in tears. Ah, damn it, Scotty, now you're going to make me cry. You know, I think that you're right about becoming a sentimental SAP, lately. You definitely need some time away from me to get back your tough Joe cop image and mannerism back. There was silence as if Scotty was trying to gather himself. Okay, this silence I don't like. I was just kidding, darling. I'll see you in a couple 3 days. Be good, do what the doctor says, and make sure you give Becca plenty of payback. They both laughed as they said their final goodbyes and hung up the phone. Katie put her phone down on the table, dropped to her knees, and looked up to heaven and praised God for Scotty. Scotty dropped the phone and closed his eyes tight. Becca leaned in to give him a hug and he welcomed her with his arms. Matthew, Becca, I think she's going to be okay with that stupid star. I guess he's not so stupid after all. He's easily trained, and he's got a backbone. Tears welled in Scotty's eyes, as well as Matthew's and Becca's eyes, which were still swollen. You done good, Matthew. You sure know how to spot 'em, don't ya? Scotty added. God did that, Scotty. Yeah, and a perfect solution this is, now isn't it? He said as he grabbed his side. Becca shook her head. Hey, no tears in heaven, right? That way, I won't be in agony watching my Katie bear blossom with a new man, but I'll be in heaven rejoicing with God and thanking him for the 5 years he did give me with her and you all. Scotty, I wish you wouldn't just give up so easily. I'm not giving up, Becca, I'm praising God for his mercy. Matthew held out his hand and Scotty grabbed it, and then Becca put her hand over both of theirs. Back in Franklin, a much relieved Katie returned to the living room, and all eyes were upon her, waiting to see her reaction to whatever news she received. How's Scotty? Nick asked. Katie looked at Jeannie and then at Gran and Gramps. I gotta say, Gran, Gramps, Jeannie, and Andy, you surely did raise a fine son for him to be so concerned about my Scotty. She tilted her head at Nick and gave him a half-smile. No one said a word. What? That was a compliment. Oh, was a collective sigh. Thank yous were heard by all. What was that about? She asked. Nick walked up to her, put his arm around her, led her to the last chair in the room, and kissed her on the forehead. Sweetness, they're just so used to you throwing potshots at me, a compliment, just threw them off. Katie began to sit, then she rose and looked at all the people in the room. She walked over to the lady sitting next to Sean. "Hi, you must be Sean's Kathy. I'm Katie. I've heard so many good things about you," she said, eyeing Sean, giving his approval. The tall, thin, dirty blonde rose from her seat, towering over her, and put her hand in Katie's. "I'm so happy to meet you. My Sean tells me what a wonderful person you are in person, but I'm not surprised." Katie pulled her in for a hug. "And your wonderful man here has told me what a wonderful person you are and that we are somewhat alike, able to stop an arrogant man in his tracks." She turned to look at Nick. The entire roomful of people eyed Katie, then Nick. "See, like that," Nick said. Katie covered her mouth. She surveyed the room. She then went over to stand next to Nick and put her arm around his waist. "I'm sorry, you all must think I'm a beast." "Actually, no, Katie, we need someone like you in the family to knock him down, regularly. We've never been able. You're the only one who can force-feed this egomaniac humble pie, and we love you for that," Annie said. She brought her husband, who had arrived while she was in talking to Scotty, over to Katie and introduced him. With only one seat left, Nick motioned for Katie to sit, while he leaned against the bay window wall right behind her. She turned back to see him standing. "Hey, PC, I can share my seat here with you, if you don't mind sitting next to me," she quipped. He chuckled and shook his head, getting her insinuation. She shuffled over, but noted how little the spot was that he would have to sit on, so she stood. He looked at her with a quizzical stare. She motioned for him to sit, and she sat on his lap. He put his arm around her waist to steady her, and she hugged his arms that were wrapped around her. The light in Nick's eyes let everyone know just how happy he was to have his teach right there on his lap, in his arms with his mother and sister, remembering how devastated he was just over a month ago, fearing this day would never come. They both gave him a warm, happy nod, and Katie noted their approval. She turned to look back at Nick, looking down at him slightly, with a blushing smile. "What?" he asked. She looked at his mother and his sister, then back at him. She shook her head and wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered in his ear. "So, I pass inspection?" "With flying colors, teach." "Honor roll, even," he said, cackling. She threw her head back and gave him a tight squeeze around his neck. "Phew," she said, looking at Jeannie and the rest of the gang. Nick chuckled and Katie giggled. As the conversations went on, Katie grew more comfortable with Nick's family with each passing moment. They made her feel right at home, as if she had always been a part of this clan. The potshots to Nick were in tune with Katie's personality. Annie's bump was beginning to become quite noticeable, and she wanted to announce her pregnancy, but with Kathy there, she felt uncomfortable. All of that became a moot point when Katie asked Annie how she was feeling, assuming her to have spilled the beans with a baby bump fairly noticeable. Katie threw her hand to her mouth when the celebrants in the room all jumped up, each feigning surprise. "You all are the worst actors I've ever met." "You all knew, didn't you?" Annie asked. Ray curled his lips in and his eyes went back and forth. "Raymond Ellis McDaniel, I'm surprised at you." He shrugged his shoulders and the entire room full of people broke out in a hearty laughter. Annie's almost black-haired, dark-skinned husband Raymond Ellis McDaniel was a second-generation American of an Indian mother and an Irish Catholic father. He was a jovial, hard-working, but no-nonsense kind of man. He worked as a physician's assistant at Vanderbilt Hospital. Annie met him on the rebound of a love affair gone badly with one of Nick's former friends. Ray had noticed Annie long before she noticed him, and whenever she was working, he would request her to draw the blood on his patients until he could work up the nerve and find the perfect opportunity to ask her to coffee or lunch in the hospital cafeteria. He found a discrepancy in a blood draw, and he had to go down to the lab to investigate. Annie happened to be in the storage room, crying, and he inadvertently interrupted her. From there, he went in for the kill, and had a ring on her finger a year later. His height was that of Annie's 5 feet 10 inches, which caused Annie to wear flats most of the time. His long hours frustrated Annie, and kept her at her parents' house quite often, especially at mealtimes. She hated being home alone at their modest 3-bedroom Cape Cod-style house in Smyrna. Annie kept looking at Kathy while she was being hugged, noting Kathy's forced smile. She and Kathy were kindred spirits, 10 years apart in age, but having suffered a miscarriage around the same time last year. They grieved together, prayed together, hoped together, but sadly they were not celebrating together. Katie noted Kathy's faint smile, and Annie's empathetic looks. She then remembered what Sean had told her about Kathy's miscarriage. "Kathy, I'm sure you'll get pregnant real soon, we'll have them together and it will be so much fun. Heck, you can help me out, I'm clueless on how to raise a baby and you have so much experience. With all those brothers and sisters, and your 3 great kids, I'm bound to glean wisdom from you. Annie, I'd share my wisdom with you, regardless. You ought to know that." Sean could see the look in Katie's eye and knew that Katie wanted to do what Katie does best, encourage the downtrodden. "I'm pretty sure that my baby-making days are over, anyway. I'm nearly 43. Now, that's hogwash if I ever heard it," Katie said. All eyes landed on Katie. "My mom had me when she was nearly 48. Her mom had her when she was 45. Don't go there, Kathy." "Thanks, Katie, but do you know the odds of getting pregnant in the 40s, and maintaining a full-term pregnancy? I mean it's like 15%, or something low like that." Katie rose from Nick's lap, walked over to where Kathy was sitting, got down on her knees, took Kathy's hands in hers, and laid them on her lap. "Do you know the odds of getting pregnant and having a full-term baby if it is God's will?" Kathy smiled. 100%, right? Kathy nodded. "Good point, Teach." Nick smiled with pride over his woman. "That is what I've been telling her, to sit and wait for God to do it, when he deems best," Sean said. "That's all fine for you to say when you don't know what it's like month after month to cry it out. Those 2 weeks are brutal. I know that if God wills it, it will happen, but I don't know that he wills it for sure. How can I ever rest in that?" "Kathy, pardon me if I'm being too nosy, but why do you want a baby so much?" Katie asked. "I don't know, ever since we lost the last one, I've been dying to have one." "Why do you suppose?" Katie asked. "Because it feels like someone's missing." "Bingo, you just won the money." "Huh? I'm not sure I follow you." Sean crooked his head. "Okay, Teach, in English. She does that, but as she told me, a teacher will find 50 different ways to teach her students until they get the whole picture, right?" Katie looked behind her and smiled at Nick. "Good student, a memory like an elephant, but a brain like a—" "Katie," Gran said, interrupting her. She looked back to Gran and smiled, then at Nick, who gave her that look of disapproval. "Right, Gran, sorry, PC. Now, Sean and Kathy, were you two trying to have a child before you lost the last one?" "No, we figured we were done a long time ago, when Jordan was born," Kathy answered. "Why did you suppose that?" They looked at each other and shrugged their shoulders. "I guess we figured that 3 was enough, and we could probably swing 3 at the most, financially. Sean was working 2 jobs, and we were barely making it, so we just decided to quit, and that 3 was a good number." "Well, you were wrong. It may have seemed like a good number, but maybe God had in mind for you 4, or 5, or 6, or 9, even." "Whoa, slow down, there Katie, she's 42, I'm almost 40, I don't want to be changing diapers from my nursing home room." They all laughed. "So, you think you couldn't handle 4 or 5? "No, I suppose we could if we had to," Sean answered. Kathy looked down at Katie, who was sitting on her knees, like the teacher in her did as she was readying herself to give her recipients a lesson in God's wisdom. "If you had to, you could, Sean and Kathy, but did you want to?" "No," Sean answered. "Yet, but now you do." They both answered yes simultaneously. "Yes, very much," Kathy said. "Bingo, you just won the money, again." "I know where she's going with this," Gran said. Do you want the pleasure of finishing, Gran? Nope, Kate, dear, you bring it home, bring in the big finish. Kathy, Sean, did it ever occur to you that God had always planned more than 3 for you, but the only way for you to want the 4th was to get the 4th and lose it? I know it sounds cruel, but really, it's not. Your 4th child is in the hands of God, spared all of life's rough moments, and I've been acquainted with a few. We know that, Teach. Katie shook her head. I see some things remain. He's still interrupting without raising his hand, she cackled, and Nick laughed. So, now, you say you want a 4th child, really bad, but what really you want is your 5th child. The only reason you want your 5th child is because God planted that desire in you. He knew that you wouldn't have tried nor wanted, Katie made the quotation marks with her fingers, your 5th child on your own, so he had to give you a little push. You see, Scripture says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. What that Scripture doesn't mention is that God plants those desires, then has us open the gateway of heaven by bringing down the blessing with prayer, and lots of it. Knee-breaking, heart-rending, afflicted prayer. You see, you both came to know God better from your loss, right? Yes, someone gave your book to me. I read it, and it spoke directly to my heart. Then I started praying for Sean to read it, and as a guy, he typically refused until he saw your picture on the back. Then he poured through it a couple of times. Sean nodded in agreement. That's true, Sean quipped. Katie gave a nod of approval to Sean. A brilliant man he is, she said as she winked at Sean. He smiled, knowing she was doing what she did best, and Kathy would leave that house a different person that night. Okay, so let's take the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle of our lives apart. You lost your baby when you did, and God allowed it at that specific time, then you were given a book written by a complete stranger, whom Sean recognized, because he met me at the booth in Indianapolis, because Nick here was goofing off, and not on stage where he was supposed to be for the encore. Nick interrupted her. Excuse me, but I had a little help, there. If I hadn't had to chase you down the street 4 times, then you blowing me away with your coke stealers metaphor, I wouldn't have been late. No pun intended, right? Annie said, cracking up. The whole room looked puzzled while Nick, Sean, and Annie laughed, and Katie hid her head in her hands, shaking her head, but threw in a good chuckle. Well, maybe intended a little, Katie said as she eyed Nick, who turned 3 shades of pink, embarrassed by his sister and his girl. So, he told you, huh? Katie said, facing Annie, who nodded while laughing still at Nick's expense. What is a coke stealer metaphor? Ray asked as he watched Annie laugh. Nick looked at Annie and shook his head. Katie cocked her head behind her, again, then eyed everyone in the room, and faced Sean and Kathy, again. There he is again, interrupting, changing the subject, and making me forget where I was in the lesson. Geez, I would have hated to be your school teacher. She looked back, then at Sean and Kathy, again. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah, he read my book because he met and spoke with me a good long time, because he saw me at the restaurant, because he met me at the meet and greet, because Nick's road manager had an emergency. So, you can thank that person who had the emergency, because I met Nick at the meet and greet, when my niece chickened out. Then Sean was at the restaurant where I was waiting for Matthew, and he saw me. He then contacted Nick, who bolted for the restaurant, when he saw the text, which made me cry, but we'll get into that later. Nick chuckled. So then, Nick came over to sit with me, bold as he was, even though I tried to chase him off, but those girls wouldn't let me, in particular, the one who chickened out of the meet and greet. Then when Matthew came, he forced my hand to stay with Nick, by threatening to tell of this weird bathroom habit I have. Everyone in the room started laughing, even Katie. Then, I decided to stay to see what Prince Charming had up his sleeve, and he was mightily effective. He had had a lot of practice. No, I hadn't, and you know that I kept sounding like an idiot, messing up my words, tongue-tied, and like you said, putting my foot in my mouth. I was a blubbering fool. And this proves my point about the tortoise brain thing, because his family did not know that he was a blubbering idiot, because I just chose to cover it with a compliment, but now that the cat is out of the bag, not by my doing by the way. Yes, he did look like an idiot most of the night, but one with adorable dimples that would not stop calling to me. Katie kept going, speaking in monotone while the whole room laughed. Get to the point. I will, but Italian Yankee style. Oh, did I mention I have ADHD? So, I kinda tend to go the long way around, deal with it, she said. The whole room busted a gut, laughing. No, Nick said, poking fun at Katie. My dear intrusive, impertinent, impulsive, indolent vocal instrumentalist, who doubles as an ignoramus sometimes, if you hadn't interrupted me so often, trying to defend yourself, when you needn't have, nor prove those 5 words about yourself, which you now have to look up in your phone, none of that would have come out. The entire room burst out laughing uncontrollably, all but Nick. He folded his arms across his chest, his face grew beet red, and he looked as if he were going to get really angry, but she was right. He started tapping his foot. The cartel in the room did not take a breath laughing in between Katie's wit, there was no time. Nick got up and left the room for the kitchen. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble, now. I can't fix this one the way I fixed it all those other times, at the restaurant. What did you do? Annie asked. Katie looked over at Annie and raised one eyebrow. Oh, well, yes you can, he wouldn't mind. Well, Scotty would, she said as she held up her ring finger. Would he? Sean asked, causing Katie to whip her head around and shoot a rocket of rage at Sean. Yes, he would, and so would I. The room became silent, and the air became thick for a moment. Everyone knew Scotty's plan, but Katie, yet she knew he was pulling away from her, and she thought she was the only one who knew that. Excuse me, I need to go find a deflated egomaniac artist, and pat his ego, since there are no groupies here for him to do that, she said with some embarrassment. Annie chuckled, but the rest of the group appreciated the fact that she cared enough to want to build him back up after she tore him down. Sean nodded, knowing that was her modus operandi from 2 years ago, and gave her his approval gaze, nodding his head. Katie rose from her squatting position and chased Nick. As she walked away, Sean filled in the rest of the group on her talent. You know, she did this the whole time at the meet and greet. She kept knocking him on his ass when he was trying to impress her, then she'd pick him back up in the same breath. It was magical. I knew then she was the one. Katie entered the kitchen, but he was not there. She looked out the kitchen window at the swing, and it was not moving. Willpower, she thought. Katie followed the footpath by the light of the moon and did indeed find Nick. He was petting Willpower by the moonbeams shining in through the cracks in the barn and a few windows. He was talking to him and petting his nose. The moonbeams seemed to shine on the superstar like a spotlight, and Katie enjoyed the view. His embarrassment was center stage, and Katie had to sing him a new song, one that would lift him from where she sunk him. He turned his head, then turned it away from her, and she sighed, feeling bad that she went too far, again. She stood in the doorway. May I approach? She asked. No, why don't you just go finish making your point, and I won't interrupt anymore. You sure did bring back some good memories, with all those interruptions. Nick snorted. Good memories of me being an idiot. No, good memories of you being sweet and charming, and kind, and comforting, and generous, and caring, and simply irresistible. I thought you said I was resistible in the hospital. Oh, and were you? Nick thought of the times that he kissed her, and each time she caved. He lowered his head, remembering his bullying her, made her angry, pushing her into Scotty's arms and bed. No, and that was why you ended up in bed with Scotty, 2 floors up, he said with his head lowered. Katie walked over to Nick, whose eyes were closed, and he did not see her coming, until she touched his back. I'm so sorry about that. Can you forgive me? Nick chuckled a sad laugh. Why do you feel the need to apologize for that? It's not like we were anything. No, we weren't, but it's hurting you now, and I'm so sorry about that. Nick turned his head back to Willpower and rested his forehead against Willpower's long nose. How is it that you can be so kind, compassionate, brilliant, wonderful, funny, and then so mean to me, by insulting me and poking fun at me, making fun of me in front of my entire family? I don't know, it's just like you said. I need an audience, and then I'm great. Think of it as a comedy routine, like Sonny and Cher. I'm Cher, you're Sonny, and we're going to make a fortune as a comedy team if you play along. Play along? Yes, do you actually think I think that you are stupid? Nick nodded. You seem to have found creative ways to remind me of my tortoise brain, so I guess you do. Well, you'd be wrong about that. You are one of the most talented, smartest men I know. You wouldn't be where you are if you weren't. You are more talented than 85% of some of those bozos who can't even sing, and who are just in there, because of luck, or the mere stupidity of people posing as fans. Nick turned his head toward her, while keeping his hands on Willpower's reins. Look at Willpower, here. Katie moved in and patted his neck and kissed him on the side of his face, while he nuzzled her. Who knew that this horse had a chance, against all odds? You did. Who saved his life, and now is this big beast's best friend? You are. Who knew why I acted the bratty way I did? Who showed me the injured little girl still inside of me, this time? You did. You are not dumb, sweet pea, you are just a moving target, darling, and I have really good aim. Nick broke down, laughing, holding his side, unable to stop laughing. Katie started chuckling with him. He let go of Willpower and reached down to hug her, burying his head into her neck, in that familiar place he was. That night the little angry boy inside disappeared. PC, you are so lovable, you're impossible not to love. Nick pulled away. Don't go thinking I just said those 3 little words, my friend, I love my friends. She smiled up at him, raised her eyebrows, and pulled him down for another hug, and patted him on the back. I love you, Nick Thomas, I think that you are going to make a wonderful friend, as a matter of fact, you already have. Katie may have been living in denial 2 more weeks, but Nick was satisfied to take those 3 little words, even if they weren't meant the way he wanted. And I am honored to be in your circle of friends, dear teacher. Good, now, I need a partner for my comedy routine, are you up for it? Do I always have to look stupid? Not if you can come up with some really good one-liner comebacks. They both laughed, and Katie took his hand in hers and dragged him back in the house. Everyone was relieved to see Katie and Nick both smiling as they re-entered the room. Sorry for the interruption, folks. Nick sat on a chair as Katie knelt down next to Kathy, again. So, did you get all of my point, Kathy? Yes, that God put that baby in me to get me to want another, because it was his plan all along. Oh. I've lost my touch as a teacher. I need to get back to teaching kindergartners. Kathy looked at her funny. Gran, you want to help me out here, obviously, I've let my ADHD, and my comedy routine with Nicholas Paul here, who's played along fabulously, interfere with the message. Sure, Kate. I'll try. Simply put, my dear Kathy, God set all of this in motion before the creation of the world. He knew that Katie would be in that line, meet our Nicholas Paul, thus Sean would meet Katie. He knew that you had drifted from him, and he wanted you back, so he created that 4th child in you to bring you to your knees, and to Katie's book. He knew that the message in that book would bless you and speak to your heart. He knew that Katie's picture would attract Sean to read it, and the both of you would return your hearts to God. May I come in for the big finish, Gran? Why, of course, you did all that work anyway. I won't steal your thunder. Gran winked at Katie. So, now you are learning how to delight yourself in the Lord, one simple prayer at a time. You are developing a grown-up relationship with Him, to do good works on behalf of the kingdom. Now, when you are fully delighted in the Lord, your prayer won't be, oh, God, please give me another baby. It will be, oh, God, I love you now, and will always. I will love you whether I have another child or not. I want your will for my life, because you have proven it to be best, and I know I'll be happier in the long run, and more in awe of you to have seen your grace and wisdom played out in the highs and lows of my life. Then and only then will you get knocked up. Class dismissed. The entire room broke down again, and Katie looked at Nick, who laughed, shaking his head and loving her more each minute. Katie held out her hand for a fist bump, and Gran happily obliged. Katie walked back over to where Nick was sitting and plopped herself back down on his lap, wrapping her arms around a very proud Nicholas Paul Thomas, who was basking in her presence there, showing his family just what it was that made him fall madly in love with her 2 years prior. Katie, didn't you say that you only became a true believer like 2 years ago? Yet you have all this spiritual insight, wisdom and faith, Annie said. Katie slapped herself upside the head. PC, do you want to finish this one off, seeing how it was all because of you, anyway? He looked puzzled. She whispered in his ear, and he opened his mouth and widened his eyes, nodding while she spoke. Well, it appears my jolt giver has missed a very important element in the setup of God's plan, or what we would call the bridge to a song. Now, if we had not met and had not fallen madly in love. We? Katie asked. Stop interrupting the artist, teacher. Nick said. Katie zipped her lip and gave him an open hand motion to let him know to continue. Like I was saying, if we hadn't fallen madly in love with each other, he stopped and eyed her, knowing the truth, even if she wanted to deny it. Then she wouldn't have had believed in the credibility of a very important lesson that I taught her, that was that she was a Job's princess, and God had a very special plan for her life, more than just teaching some lucky 6-year-olds. She became a true believer that night, and now God could take all that stored up wisdom that was imparted to her from Matthew, plus her newfound fresh faith, and put a book together that would end up blessing you too and bringing you back to God, and countless others. We kept wondering that night we met when we did, when Katie was not free to bask in our newfound love for each other. Instead of doing what she wanted, which was a fresh new boyfriend, he said, winking at Katie, she stuck it out with the treasured one of the past during his hour of need, because she is the kind of person who is compassionate, empathetic, loyal, devoted, and self-sacrificing. I needed to get my heart broken, pining over my jolt giver for 2 years so that I could become a complete ass, to see what a wishy-washy Christian I was, before my little trip down the prodigal path. This way, now I know how depraved I can be, whom I need to emulate, and learn the predicates of love, like you said, Sean, not just that warm happy feeling below, like you said, teach. God brought all of us to point A, which leads to point B, which leads to point C, which eventually brings us all the way to point Z. The end. The entire room broke out in applause, and Katie and Nick stood and bowed to the audience. She sat back down on his lap, and wrapped her arms around his neck, again. Jolt giver, no pressure, right? She said with a smirk. Right, friend, no pressure. He said. As the evening progressed, the treasured family members and friends opted for some friendly competition and played some team player games. Some pinning the men against the women, and some with partners. As Nick watched Katie interact with his family, he was amazed at how well she fit in, but more amazing was how his love for her continued to grow. Every once in a while, if they were playing a game and Nick and Katie were on opposite teams, they would glance and stare at each other. Sometimes their eyes would connect, and they would smile, and other times, one would be lost in the gaze of the other, but witnessed by someone else in the room. It was obvious that they were in love, but Katie was in denial. She left the room before it got too late and called Scotty's phone one more time to check on him. When she re-entered the room, Nick's first question was, "How's Scotty?" "Nicholas Paul, why are you so concerned about him? Are you planning a funeral for him so you can swoop in on his girl?" The whole room fell silent. What, was that in poor taste? Oh, my gosh, hide me Nicholas Paul, I just said something so stupid. She covered her face. Nick rose from his seat, and put his arm around her, guiding her to their seat. No, sweetness, they are just not used to Yankee humor. Katie kept looking around the room at the serious faces. Annie wanted to break the tension, so she changed the subject. So, Katie, you have a closing on some property down here, are you going to share where it is, or what you've bought? Well, I suppose, Nick interrupted her. Hey, Teach, the moon is in the most perfect position right now, and it's so bright. I want to show you the forgiveness field with the moon this bright. It's absolutely breathtaking. Now? This time at night, she asked. Oh yes, dear, it is really beautiful, and the moon lights up your path, Gran added. Even in the woods? Nick nodded. PC, you aren't suggesting that we go out to the forgiveness field for some parking without the car, are you? They all chuckled uncomfortably. No, I really want to show you how the moonbeams off the pond just take your breath away, he said looking around the room. Okay, let me run up and get my jacket. Katie hopped off Nick's lap and darted up the stairs. Phew. Nick said. That was too close. They all looked around, not sure who knew. Nick had told his mother earlier, and he suspected that his grandparents were aware of the location of her dream home. The kids had left a couple of hours earlier to play some Xbox games in the family room, down in the basement, so it was safe to let Annie in on the secret. What is going on here? Phew, what? Annie asked. Annie, don't talk about her house, Jeannie said. Yeah, she's bound to back out, if she knew, Nick said. If she knew what? Annie asked. Shoo. Nick said as he heard Katie at the top of the stairs. He walked to the bottom of the steps as she descended and watched her with his cheeky grin. You ready, Teach? Yep, she said coming down the steps. When she got to the bottom of the steps, she stood at his eye level, a couple of steps up from him, and whispered to him. Are you taking me out there, because I just embarrassed you? He chuckled and shook his head. He wanted to take her in his arms, but he put his hand on the railing and resisted. No, of course not. She had the most pathetic sheepish look in her eyes. I promise. You did not embarrass yourself, nor me, princess. He put his hand out to assist her down the last couple of steps. They walked through the dining room, out to the kitchen, avoiding the occupants in the living room. Hey, how does the horse know the way in the dark? Are you kidding me? Well, power could get us there blindfolded and sound asleep. Come on. Nick grabbed his jacket, threw it on, and led Katie out the back door. When the door was safely closed, Annie sat forward, wanting to know what it was that Nick was trying to keep her from asking. Okay, first I didn't know that Scotty was dying, now what else are you hiding from her? Annie asked. Ray looked on while having his arm around his wife. Yeah, what's going on? He asked. That property that Katie bought, just so happens to be the yellow Victorian next to Nick's house, Sean said. What? Annie popped up to the edge of the sofa. How the heck did that happen? Divine Providence, dear, Gran said. Annie leaned back and turned to her husband who laughed with her. Did you know this, Ray? He shook his head. This is news to me. Annie turned to her mother. Mom, how did you find out? Nick just told me today. That was where he found her last night. Scotty figured out that she would be hiding out at her new place. He just found out, last night, that Nick lived next door. He said that Scotty was a little upset at first, but then realized it was for the best for Katie. He's accepted it as a God thing. It's obvious that God wants Katie and Nick together, don't you think? Kathy asked. The occupants nodded in agreement. The circumstances were too providentially planned to deny. So, what was she just driving around, looking for a house? Annie asked. No, her manager, Jay, found it, and knew she'd love it. He found it when he was investigating Nick, Sean said. Wait, her manager was investigating my son? Jeannie asked, somewhat disturbed. Why is he snooping around my son? Jeannie, I think that's pretty obvious, sweetheart. Don't you? Andy asked, trying to smooth over her suspicion. Jason Pennington keeps a very tight rein on her. He has to, she's worth tens of millions, Sean said. Jay has investigated all of us. All 3 sides of the family, and he went back 2 generations. He's very thorough. Jeannie and Andy sat up. Annie's eyes popped open. Isn't that kind of over the top? Annie asked. Jason Pennington is definitely over the top. Sean said. Look what he's done by building a multi-million-dollar foundation with 1 book and a firecracker teacher. He took on the big publishers like a David against Goliath. So, yeah, he's over the top, and that is how he is going to look out for Katie's best interest. He wanted to make sure that Katie is with a good family. I can understand that, can't you all? Well, I'm sure we were easy targets, huh, Emma Grace, with your hospitality? Jacob said. Sean and Kathy nodded. Getting into the Thomases was a bit more of a stretch. What about my father in jail, didn't that concern him? Kathy laughed. Should we tell them? I suppose it can't hurt. You get that pleasure, Kath. Sean said. Jason is one of those overachievers, right? They nodded. So, who do you think started that prison ministry? Jeannie, Andy, Annie, and Ray all sat up straight. Their eyes rolled skyward, pushing their lids back wide. Jacob and Emma laughed. So, that young man that sought out my dad, spent countless hours with him, teaching him, helping him, was Jay Pennington, Katie's manager? Kathy and Sean nodded. Annie folded her hands across her chest. Yep, Katie had told Jay about him, sent him her book, and Jay went the extra mile. Sean said. So, you see, meeting Katie was the spark that lit a fire in many people's souls. Wow, you're right, Gran, God really did have a grand plan in all of this, and he ordered everyone's steps. Kathy added. Gran nodded. Well, how about that? Annie asked as she sat back. It's obvious God has had his hand on both Jay and Katie and blessed their work, making it very fruitful, of course, because they always give God the glory and never take the credit, Gran said. How do you know all of this, Sean? Jeannie asked. Well, we, happened to bump into him, about a few months back, right, Kath? Yes, it was the middle of October, you had just finished reading Katie's book. We were eating out, and we thought it odd, but Jay came up to us and introduced himself as Katie's manager. He said that he remembered seeing Sean up on stage, and he was concerned about the slanderous things Nick was saying about Katie. We had a meeting and tried to find a plan to end the feud. We had no idea that a Valentine's country benefit concert, a mad trooper, and a brick wall were God's solution. It makes perfect sense, though. Kathy added. Wow, I can imagine the look on Katie's face when she finds that out, Annie said. If she finds out, Matthew and Jay think she'll back out, so we are not going to tell her. And, Scotty doesn't want anyone else knowing about his cancer. Not even the band members can know, Sean said. Kathy joined in, adding more detail to Katie's tormented heart. Yeah, Katie knows something is up, and it's really scaring her. She senses Scotty hiding something, or letting go, and she feels like she's flying without a net right now. Scotty's plan is for Nick and Katie to become bonded enough that he'll be able to help her handle being dealt the blow. Sean put his arm around his wife, patting her on the opposite shoulder. And, shockingly enough, my wife here has finally learned how to keep a secret. He turned to her. I'm proud of you, honey. No one in this room had learned that from you before now. She elbowed her husband. He then looked at Annie. So, Annie, do you think that you could keep this under wraps as well as my wife has here? I resent that, Sean. I'm not near as bad as Kathy. They all snorted a laugh, and Kathy folded her arms across her chest. I'm not that bad. In unison, the entire room let her know the truth. Yes, you are, they said. They all laughed, even Kathy, as she buried her head into her husband's chest. Part 2. Resisting the Teacher. Chapter 13. Finding a Friend by